This video is going to discuss Factory Talk. What is Factory Talk? Factory Talk is a software for developing and running an HMI or Human Machine Interface application. This is Alan Bradley's software for interfacing the HMI with their PLCs. So the Factory Talk View Machine Edition is this Machine Edition is designed specifically for like a touch screen sort of interface that would be running right at the right near a machine or near a PLC. And basically the Machine Edition or ME software runs on a Microsoft Windows operating system. And so they have what Alan Bradley markets as what they call panel view systems, are typically like a little touchscreen system that actually has a processor and memory. So it's actually like a small computer attached directly to the touch screen. Okay. It's also used for what they call SCADA. Okay, and SCADA is a general term that stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. All right, so what we can do a lot of different things with this. We can do some computer screen animations. We can you can actually turn pretty much any standard computer into an active control panel to interface with your PLC. We can collect and process data. We can display online graphs or real-time graphs and also historical graphs. And we can also provide alarm information. So Factory Talk is designed to work in conjunction with the RS Links software, which actually provides like the underlying layer of communication on the Windows machine. Now here's just a few screens kind of showing what you can do with the Factory Talk software. So these screens are configured. You can see here that we have some various numeric values. So you can see there's some numeric values here that are just being displayed. There's some bar graphs. There's kind of a meter here, and the meter actually you can set the colored zones on here. And what these all are doing, whether it's a number or a bar graph or a meter kind of graph, what these are showing are information from the PLC. So the tags within the PLC are sent across the network over to the HMI and can be displayed on here. We can also use this so that you can actually enter in new values, and you can use like buttons. You can apply buttons that allow you to press on the button to start or stop or otherwise interact it. So here is another interface. Again, just showing you here are some values, some numeric values that are being displayed and scaled. You can see we've got meters per minute or torque and amps. So these are all various analog inputs into a PLC that are then being sent over to this human machine interface, HMI. You can see that we've got some buttons here, so we can have some run buttons and some other buttons that just allow us to control the just some binary control. And we have some plus minus buttons that'll advance a numeric value. So if you wanted to like speed up this motor, for instance, we could press the plus button and that would send a new revolution per minute value over to the PLC, and the PLC would then send that to the motor to speed it up. And this is just a single screen, but you can actually build lots of different screens. So typically there'll be like some kind of alarm screen, or some work screens, some different machines or whatever, and you can monitor the tags for those machines and make changes if allowed, depending on the design. So there's just another view of what what you can sort of do with these HMI with this Factory Talk software. Now here's yet another one, and this one here, as you can see, it's actually kind of a drawing. We've got a tank here, and we've got some valves, and we've got some tags coming and going. We've got an electric motor. So what you can actually do, one thing you can do with this software is you can take something like a CAD drawing, computer-aided drafting file, and upload into this software, and then put the tags within that drawing, so that it shows the actual layout of your system. All right, here's yet another one. Just kind of showing you. Here's kind of a little selector switch type thing, and it just has showing kind of the layout of the process, and then there's actually a chart over here where you can display the data in real time as it's being displayed, or go back and view historical data in a chart kind of format. So this is just another chart kind of thing showing here. This is just kind of like a one screen that's just showing the various torques from various runs. So this is like historical data. All right. So how do we use Factory Talk? Well, we would start by starting up our RS links and setting up our communications to the PLC, and then we would create our program. So we need to create our PLC program and then download that to the PLC. So we create our tags, all the tags that we had in our program. Then we can choose to select one or multiple or all the tags and tie them into the HMI as you deem necessary. All right, now one of the things that we kind of showed on there is you can do start and stop buttons. All right, so you can have start and stop buttons. Now those buttons are in the HMI are actually going to be virtual buttons. So on our PLC, we know that the PLCs we have in the classroom, we already have a red mushroom style e-stop sort of button already attached, which is wired normally closed. And then we have the green start button, which is wired normally open. But then we can create a virtual start button and a virtual stop button. And then when we go to our HMI, we can actually put in a graphic for a button and then attach the tag into this HMI, so we can start or stop the system by pressing a button using a mouse or your fingers on a touch screen on the HMI. You could actually energize or stop the system. Now, if you're going to add a virtual start and virtual stop to your ladder logic, this is what it should look like. You can actually have multiple stop buttons. Stop buttons, remember, are always wired in series. So notice here we've got our physical stop button, and then I'm putting in another stop button, which is going to be in series with this one. And then I have my start button, which of course is in series with my control relay or my virtual relay or that I'm using as my seal-in circuit, right? So this is a standard seal-in circuit, but the difference with this seal-in circuit is the fact that I've added a second stop, which I'm going to make a virtual stop, so it won't be a physically wired button, but it'll be a button on my HMI. And then I'm going to have my physically wired start button, but in parallel with that, I'm going to have a virtual start button. All right, so just so like we can have physical start and stop buttons, we can actually have virtual start and stop buttons. All right, and this is what the ladder logic inside of your RS Logix 5000 would look like. All right, so to start Factory Talk, what we want to do is go to our Windows key, and then in the search we can just kind of type in fact. I mean, you could type in the entire word factory, but usually something like FACT would be enough to bring it up. And that would give you this listing over here on the right. So you'd have lots of different choices in here. The ME station, remember that's the machine edition interface on the actual HMI. But if we want to build our screens, if we want to go in and build our screens, we want to open the Factory Talk View Studio. So that's what we would select first to start building our screen. All right, so once Factory Talk opens up, you'll see this screen here where it says new/open machine edition application. And so if we're going to create a brand new one, then of course we'll have to click on the new tab, and then we can give it a name. So we can come in here and give our new application a name and a description. So it's an excellent idea to do both. To do both the name and the description. Try to use a good name. When you give it a name, you want to try to at least make it a descriptive name. Creating a name like test or lecture or lab 1 or 7 or whatever it might be is just not a good way of naming things. So try to give it a name that applies to what it is that you're actually going to be building this HMI for. Also, there's a checkbox if you're going to be downloading this to one of the touchscreen HMI interfaces, which run the machine edition, then you need to make sure you check that box. If you're just going to be using it on a standard PC, you would leave that unchecked. All right. So once you selected the new one, it's going to, it'll take a few seconds for it to open up, and then you'll see this Explorer window show up, and then to the right of that is the workspace. All right, and so this Explorer window is kind of where it's very similar to like the RS Logix 5000 Explorer window, where you kind of select the different sections where you want to work on. And so what we want to do is very similar to the RS Logix 5000. We're going to go to the end. So we're going to kind of start at the end. One of the very last things down there you see is the communication setup. All right, so it says RS Links Enterprise, and then underneath that is communication setup. Now, some of the newer versions don't say RS Links. They might say something more like Studio Links or Studio whatever, but then underneath of it, it will say communication setup, and it is down there at the bottom. And so we need to right click on this, or double click on it, and it'll pop up a little box, and on that box then we can say we're going to create a brand new configuration, or we're going to try to make a copy of some kind of existing configuration if you already have one. And so you make that selection. I'm going to assume we're going to do a brand new one. Now, one of the things that I really notice with the Allen Bradley software is it never opens up at full screen, but it seems to really want to be full screen. So you need to be very careful with this communication setup window in particular. You definitely want to make this full screen so that you can see as much as possible in here. Otherwise, some of the things that you need to do will be hidden. All right, so when this pops open, we click on it and we make it full screen within the main screen. And we come over, and to the right, you'll see the RS Links Enterprise kind of layout. And we want to add an Ethernet device in there. So we're going to right click on it, and we're going to select an Ethernet IP device. So select Ethernet IP device, and then underneath that Ethernet IP device, you have to add your device for your PLC. So it depends on which PLC you're actually trying to talk to. On the screen here, I have the 1756 Ethernet devices. Okay, and there's a revision A and a revision B of that, and then there's the there's a numeric revision that goes underneath that. So how do you find that out? Well, we discussed this when we talked about RS Logics. Go back to the RS Link software and call up your PLC and go to your Ethernet device, get the Ethernet number, right? This is the module number, 1756 ENET/A. That's the model number of the device, the Ethernet device attached. So yours may be different than this. If you were doing the compact logics, there'll be a 1769 number, but you need to go back to RS Links and look under RS Links and see what that model number is, and you need to make sure you select the correct one. Then it'll pop up and you have to put in the IP address of your PLC. Now at this point, I should have mentioned this before, at this point we need to make sure that the PLC is actually running our ladder logic that has the tags in it that we want to interface those tags into this HMI. So we want, at this point, we've already created our ladder logic, created our tags inside of the RS Logic software, and downloaded it to the PLC, and the PLC is running that software. Okay. So then we select, again, so we would put in the IP address of our PLC device that we want to pull the tags from, and we also have to specify which slot the Ethernet card is actually installed in. Remember the 1756 control logics, those can have a 4 slot, a 7 slot, a 10 slot, 13 slot, or 17 slot chassis. And so remember, slot numbers start counting at slot 0. So this here slide is showing slot 16. This was for a 17 slot chassis, and the Ethernet card was plugged into the very last slot. So they start counting. Slot 0 was the first slot. Slot 17, or the 17th slot, is actually numbered slot 16, and so that's where this Ethernet card was when I was setting this up. All right, so once we do that, we'll see, you'll see all the different cards, just like you see them in RS Links, they'll show up under this driver that you put here. And so then what you need to do is you actually need to go up to wherever the PLC is, which is usually slot 0, although it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's typically in slot 0. So I'm up here at slot 0 and I'm selecting this is again the 1756 L55 control logics PLC that I was setting this up for. But you select that actual PLC, and then over here on the left-hand side, I guess I didn't point right. No, not there. I was just looking for over here on the right-hand side. Let me pop an arrow in here. Oh, not that one. All right, so here, right over here under device shortcuts, you need to, there's an entry here. You want to rename this entry, and you see here I used a bad name. It just says Lecture 7. All right, but so that was kind of a poor name on my part, but you need to select this, and you select your Logix, or your PLC. You select the slot with the actual PLC in it. You highlight this. You highlight this name over here, and then you select the word apply. All right, and what that basically does is tie this Lecture 7 name to this particular PLC. One thing with these HMIs, you could have one HMI program that's actually going to interface with multiple PLCs. And so what we're doing here is we're creating names. So this name really probably should include which PLC that you're actually communicating with as part of this name, instead of just saying something arbitrary like Lecture 7, whatever that is. All right, so, but you click on Lecture 7 and it'll be highlighted. Then you come over and you click on the PLC itself, which normally is slot 0, but it doesn't have to be. And then the word apply will, it was grayed out, it'll turn black, and then you can select, the text will turn black, you can press it, and it will link this label, Lecture 7 or whatever your label was, to this particular PLC for communications. Then come over here and press this lovely OK button over here. If you don't say OK, it's not. All right, you got to press the OK button or it will not be OK. And again, you needed to resize the window to make sure that that OK button actually becomes visible. Once you've done that, your communications is ready to go. You can then come in and start building up your display. So we want to come over here and in this tree view here, about 1/3 of the way down, then there's graphics. And then underneath graphics, there's a main display. And then there's 3 sub-displays they give you by default, which is alarm diagnostics and information. You could right-click on the word displays and add a new display if you wanted more displays. But you need to pretty much start with the main display and put something there. Okay. So I click on the main display, and right now you see that there's nothing in the main display. It's just all white in here. So this is just kind of a tabula rasa, a blank slate for us to start putting objects on and assigning tags to those objects. All right, the different objects are all up here in this toolbar, and you can see there's just lots and lots and lots of different objects in there that we could add to our display. And again, one of the choices would be to, like, if you wanted to go back to, say, this one here, where we have a CAD drawing, so we could actually import our CAD drawing as kind of the background of our main display, and then start putting the labels and tags in there. All right, so this is talk about a couple of the different icons on that toolbar. So again, when we look at this, you see here's all these icons, and so you can see like these little symbols here and in here, and it's a little hard to see them on this screen. So when we go to the next slide, there's kind of a blown up view of those objects. And then if we go to the next slide, I really tried to blow up a couple of them. So this is a momentary push button. So right here is a momentary push button. So if we went there, right, that's what I was kind of pointing at right here. This is my momentary push button. So we click on that push button, and then we can put that push button onto, we can come over there, and then we basically draw a box, and then that push button will appear on our main screen. If we select the meter, if we select the meter icon, then again, once we select the meter icon, we come over and we draw a box, and then a meter will display where we drew that box. And then we can double click on that device and do it. So we can do like bar graphs, we can do trending charts, we can just do general numeric readouts, okay? And, you know, just all those different toolbars. Now, if you look at this toolbar here, if you bring your mouse on these icons and just hover, it'll give you a little pop-up menu describing what that particular item is. Okay. All right, so I drew a box here. I selected the push button, and then I drew my little box, and it just, this is my push button. It just looks like a rectangle pretty much at the moment. All right. And so that's my box. Now, when I double click on that box, I get to my properties. And so the first, under the general properties, there's some different choices for the style of the box. So you can try to get like a 3D look to it by adjusting some of these. But then right here in the middle is your button actions. So if you want this to be a stop button, then you should select normally closed. If you want it to be a open, then normally open, then you should leave it at normally open. All right, they have a little timing thing here. You can assign it, or you can also just make it a fixed value if you want. Okay. So that is the first property. All right, and then when you go to states, under states, you have a push button. The button's either pushed or not pushed. All right, so it has two states. And under those states, then, we can assign colors to these different states. And these colors allow us then to give a animation sort of thing so that when you're pushing on the button, you'll see it sort of changing. And so that you have state 0, which is the first state, which means the button's unpressed. And then state 1 would be when you press it. So you can select both the background color and the border color. You can select, there's a checkbox for blinking. You can make it blank or whatever in there. There's also an error state that you can assign to. You can change the font. You can actually label it. You label it here under caption. All right, so we see the caption here. You can label it there. All right, and then the big one is under connections. So then when you come over to the connections tab for the properties, and you click on this dot, dot, dot. Okay, so you click on the dot, 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 and that'll pop up a window so you can select your tag. All right, so when the window pops up here, you'll get this, the window will be labeled Tag Browser. And then underneath here, you'll see in bold, you see the bold, it's Lecture 7. That's the name of my HMI interface. And then underneath that, you see the Lecture 7, which is not bolded. The Lecture 7 that is not bolded, that there is simply that communication piece that we set up right here. So that's this communication piece that we set up here. So we tied lecture 7 over to our PLC. Okay, so there's our PLC, there's our lecture 7. And so what we're doing is we're doing that. Now, to get that to show up, even though we went through and we set up our communications, this usually doesn't show up. So what we have to do is right over here, if we right click and select refresh all folders, or come down here and press the button refresh all folders, that tells it to actually go out and query the PLC and say, hey, what are your tags? All right, so you've got to click on this and tell it, okay, it's time to go out and ask the PLC for its tag names. Okay, so don't forget to do a refresh all folders. And if you do a refresh all folders and it doesn't pull up your PLC program and with your tags, the tags that you created, like your virtual start and stop, and all the tags that you created into your PLC program should show up here. And if they don't, it might be, if they don't show up there, it might be because you forgot to press your OK button. All right, I've seen that happen an awful lot. They didn't press the OK button. They just go back to the tree on the left side without pressing OK. And as I said, it's not OK. So then you got to go back and set up your communications and press OK this time. All right, but that's how we get to our tags, and then you just select your tag. So if this is going to be our virtual stop button, then we would come to the main program. If that's where our virtual stop tag was under main program, we'd click on main program, and then over here on the right hand side, we would see our virtual start and stop. You can actually see them here. I actually spelled out virtual underscore start and stop, and I made it so long I can't read it all. So right here, there's a little line. You should resize it so you can read the entire name of your tag, so you can tell which one was start and stop. So remember, with this software, you know, a lot of times they don't kind of show you enough information, but they do give you the ability to adjust it and slide it over so you can read it all. So you select your tag. This is the stop button, so I would select my virtual stop tag and then press OK. And now that tag is tied into my HMI for this red button. So here's an example where I just created a stop tag, a stop button, and a start button, and I assigned them to the virtual start and stop tags in my ladder logic program. So remember, I had my ladder logic program. Must have deleted that slide. It's not there anymore. But I had my ladder logic program. There it is. Okay, with a virtual stop and a virtual start. And so I've created a red push button for stop and a green push button for start. Now these boxes here are just ordinary rectangle boxes. If you look under the settings, you can make it round if you want. Or they have a whole library of icons, so you can actually go and search through the library of icons, and you could choose like a stop button that looks kind of like this one here. You know, like this run button or whatever here. You could choose buttons that actually look more like real industrial class start and stop buttons if you wanted. You could, like I say, you can select those from the graphical interface or from the graphical library that they provide you, or you could draw one up yourself inside of a CAD system and upload the image from a CAD file. All right, so I'm just kind of showing you here. There's on the left is the RS Logix 5000 software, and you can see here's a virtual stop and a virtual start. Now I didn't in this example I don't actually have the physical buttons wired up, so I'm only doing the virtual start and stop. In my opinion, you should always have a physical stop button and start button right by the controller or device that you're starting and stopping. But you also may want it on the HMI. But if you're not on the right screen in the HMI, it may take you a while to get to the stop. So I like to have a physical start and stop button wired to the device. Okay, but this is just showing here's my virtual stop. I made this normally closed so it shows up as green when it's communicating, because this guy is closed, because I selected that back on the previous slide. I said let's make him closed, and the start button is normally open. All right, so this is just kind of showing those icons there. If we wanted to do a trending graph, you can do a trending graph where it's versus time, or you can actually just do XY plots. So if you're doing XY plots, you can be plotting two different tag variables. But if you choose standard, you're simply plotting versus time. So it's just whichever you prefer. Probably most graphs are versus time as it's changing with time, but sometimes you want to compare it to some other variable, and that would be then the XY plot. So if you look at the settings up here, right, this is for a trending graph. And then when I double click on its properties, we see the general, and then display, pins, axis, x-axis, y-axis, and then common and your connections. So we'll look at some of these here. So this under display here, you can change like your font. There's some scrolling choices down here. You can say, yes, you're allowed to scroll back in time, and you can tell it like how many records to keep open. If you put too many records there, it'll slow down the whole interface too much. Okay. All right. And then when you go to pins, okay, when you go to pins, you actually select your different tags there under pins, and then you can select colors. So you can plot multiple things on the same graph simultaneously, which we kind of showed back here on this graph. You can see that there's multiple different colored images being displayed there. And so that's kind of what we're showing here, is where each one of those would be like a tag, and we can assign the color of those each tag. And we could say, yes, it's visible or it's not visible, and then change them along after the fact. Your x-axis, if you declared an XY plot, then it would give you like a min-max range for it. But if you didn't choose XY, then it's going to be time. But you can then select your time span. Do you want it plotting per minute, per hour, or maybe you want the span, which is the width of the clock, to go for 30 seconds or 30 minutes or whatever time span you choose here. And then your y-axis will have a minimum and a maximum, or you can let it do an automatic. All right. In general, I find automatic is not too good because it's constantly flipping your scaling on you. So you have no idea what you're looking at unless you read the actual scale, the axes very carefully, because it changes on you. So most of the time, I would think that you want to make it a fixed min-max value, which you can either set from your pins, because if we went back to the pin slide, You could set a max and min value in there, and then you could say use those, or you can just customize them here on this screen. Okay, and then there's some other displaying options there for you. All right, and then we just assign the tags. We double click on the triple dots to pop open the tag browser. We need to make sure we do a refresh all folders if we haven't already. Once you've done refresh all folders, unless you go back to your PLC program and modify and add or remove tags from your PLC program, you don't need to do a refresh here again. You only need to do this refresh if your PLC program changes and the very first time you try to communicate there. If you just want to like label, like if you're doing a text graph, you probably need to put some labels and stuff on there. Then they just have an ordinary text label. You can also do gauges. Okay, we kind of showed you back on this graph over here. These are gauges over here. And so you can go in and you can set up gauges if you want. If you want a kind of an analog gauge, old-fashioned gauge display sort of thing going on there, you can come in and select a gauge. So you can specify the number of thresholds. The number of thresholds basically specifies the number of colors. So you specify the number of thresholds and then assign what colors those are going to look like. And then you can tell it, you know, if it's within this range, then blink. And then, of course, you still have your connections piece up here that you have to tie it to your analog input or to your scaled value. All right, so here's just kind of a very generic gauge sort of thing, and I added a text here on top of it to display it. Now, there's one issue with Factory Talk in our classroom. That is that when you create your Factory Talk interface, it stores the files on the C drive over here. It stores them on the C drive in this directory: users, public docs, RS View Enterprise, ME, HMI projects. So when you create this program, let's say you called the program load cell, then there will be an entire directory called load cell inside of this HMI projects directory at this path. And what you need to do is close Factory Talk, open up Windows File Explorer, and go to this directory and then copy that entire subdirectory for your program, load cell, or in my case, it was this generic lecture 7. But you want to copy that entire directory and store it onto a flash drive, or at least the D drive of the computer, so that you can recover it later. Not lately. You can recover it later. And the other thing is, if you are going to try to recover it, you need to copy it back into this directory before you actually open Factory Talk for the first time. All right, so if you want to reload this project, then you need to copy it into this directory before you start Factory Talk for the first time on that computer. If you don't, it won't pick it up. But if you copy it in there when you first start Factory Talk, it'll read that directory, and then it will show it on this screen. Remember when we had this screen and it came up and it gave us a new or existing? It gave us these existing choices. Well, if I had copied it in there before I started Factory Talk for the first time on that computer, our program will show up under existing programs here, and then we can select it and load it. Otherwise, it will not pick it up. So you would have to reboot the computer, copy it into place, and then it should show up on this screen.